Today we're going to be talking about transplanting, which is just when we move our seedlings out of their trays and into the ground where they will grow until they're ready to be harvested.
What curmudgeonly act were you doing when you called me?
First, the new home for the seedlings needs to be ready for planting. You can see these beds have already been prepared to be planted with our seedlings. Once the bed was built, we added shovelfuls of compost. We avoid tilling the soil as much as possible, so we only mixed in the compost very gently, just enough to get some on the surface of the bed and some a little deeper into the soil. Once the soil is prepared, we add the drip tape irrigation system to the bed. Using drip tape means we don't have to hand water the plants every day and can be more efficient by just turning on the water and letting them get watered while we do other things. Drip tape irrigation also means they don't get too much water too fast. For each bed, we line up the drip tape as straight as possible and walk it down the bed. We do as many lines of drip tape as we need for the amount of transplants that we're going to plant in that bed. For this kale bed, for example, we're going to do 2 lines of drip tape and be planting 3 rows of kale. Once we have the length of our drip tape measured, we cut it off from the main roll. We then puncture a hole in the main line where we want the new line to be attached. We then insert a nozzle into the hole, which will link the new line of drip tape to the main water line. As you can see, this nozzle has a valve on it, so you can turn off and on each individual line of drip tape. Once it's screwed into the main line, we then screw a plug in at the other end so the water doesn't flow out. We then insert a metal stake at the end to keep the drip tape taut along the bed and place stakes every few feet along the drip tape so it stays perfectly in place. So now that our bed is ready, let's talk about a process called hardening off. A few days or up to a week before we transplant our seedlings, we start exposing them to the world outside of the greenhouse. We take the trays of seedlings outside for a few hours each day, either in the morning or in the evening when the sun is not too strong. We set them on a table to keep bugs and disease from getting to them, and then when the sun gets too strong or when it's time to leave, we put them back in the greenhouse. This slow process helps the seedlings get used to living outside of the very comfortable environment in the greenhouse, so that when they're put into the ground, the harshness of living outdoors doesn't shock them. A plant experiencing shock is a plant more likely to get sick or die, so this is a very important step we take to maximize our yield. Another way to not shock the plants is to transplant in the morning or on a cloudy day to avoid hot afternoon sun, which would stress them out during the transplanting process. Right before we plant the seedlings, we want to give them an extra nutrition boost. In a process called bottom feeding, we pre-fertilize the trays of seedlings with a fish fertilizer and water mixture, allowing the tray to sit with the bottom exposed root areas immersed in the solution for 30 seconds. To make this, we just mix about 1 tablespoon of fish emulsion in 1 gallon of water in a tub big enough that we can lower the seedling trays in for a soak. This process gives the seedlings one last nutrition boost so they have a better chance of growing strong in the outdoors. Okay, now to the planting. In this specific bed, we're planting kale. The drip tape we set up earlier has tiny holes punched every foot into the tape. That means that the water is going to leak out of the hose every foot, showing us exactly where we want to plant our thirsty seedlings, since the kale plants need to be transplanted about every foot apart. We can turn off the irrigation whenever we need to, but for the purpose of transplanting, the water is a nice guide showing us where to put the plants. Every spot where we can see water leaking out, we create a hole as close to the drip tape as possible without digging directly underneath it. This is important because we want the seedlings to be as close to a water source as possible without getting stuck under the hose and getting damaged. You can use a hand spade or just your hand itself to dig the hole. We like using our hands because they create the perfect size hole for the seedling. If you're unsure how deep to make the hole, just experiment. For reference, you can take the seedling and estimate the distance between the bottom of the roots and the first piece of exposed stem. This should give you an idea of how deep to dig. We sometimes pop out each seedling and place it next to each hole in the drip tape and then come back through and dig all the holes and plant them. Other times we dig a hole, pop out a seedling, and plant just that one hole. Either way works fine. When you pop the seedling out of the tray, be sure not to pinch the stem because you could risk breaking it. With a windstrip tray, you can just pop the seedling out from the bottom and have them pop out into your palm. This way, you don't have to come into contact with the stem at all. If you have a regular plastic tray, you can use a popsicle stick or similar tool to nudge the seedling out of its hole. You might have to very gently hold the stem to help the seedling come out. We talked about windstrip trays in our seed sowing video and explained why they're better to use than conventional plastic trays. But you can see Audrey here just using a popsicle stick to pop each transplant out, which works really well too. Another thing to note is that if ever you pop out a transplant and there are 2 plants growing, just pinch one off because we only want 1 per hole. Once your transplant is in the hole, pat the soil gently down around the stem, making sure not to drown the stem in soil. The soil should not reach higher on the stem than it did when you first popped the seedling out. If your hole is too big, just nudge a little soil back in before you put the seedling in permanently. It's always safer to drop the seedling in, notice the hole is a little too deep, and take the seedling out again to fill the hole with a little bit more soil before planting permanently. When all of the seedlings are in the ground, it's time to mulch the plot. Mulch is a general term for anything that goes on top of the soil, so that could be straw, wood mulch, pine straw, etc. We use straw on our beds, and we cover every inch of the bed with it except for the plants themselves. Even then, it might appear that the plants are covered in straw. It's important to not leave any dirt exposed though. We want the soil less exposed to the elements, and the mulch also helps prevent weeds. We use straw and not hay because straw is the dried, hollow stalk of a grain plant without the seed head intact, while hay is the stalk of a grain plant with the seed head intact. If we used hay to mulch our beds, we would have an enormous amount of hay seed germination, which we don't want in our kale beds. That's also why hay is a source of food with a protein-rich seed. It can be fed to animals or can be threshed and turned into flour. So it's best to mulch with straw. Also at the end, you want to give the newly transplanted seedlings a thorough watering to ensure they aren't stressed in their new home. It's important to water frequently until the transplant's root system is established. So after you have hardened off the seedlings, fertilized them, prepared your bed, prepared your drip tape, transplanted the seedlings, and mulched all around them, you have set yourself up for a great planting season and should have a bed full of happy, healthy growing vegetables. Look out for more videos here coming soon on potting up, the anatomy of a seed, and more. Thanks for watching.